Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, Minister of Culture of Andorra, Minister of Culture of Colombia, excellent Ambassador to the UNESCO, esteemed audience, bienvenidos a todas y a todos to today's Fair Culture event. My name is Sabine Pfleger, and I'm delighted to be a hostess for today's official side event to the UNESCO World Conference MONDIACULT 2020 that starts tomorrow here in Mexico City. Welcome to everybody joining us here today live at the auditorium of the Goethe-Institut in Mexico City, as well as those connected through our YouTube live stream, and those who join us via Zoom around the world. Let's make this event a productive one, where we discuss and exchange ideas on how to overcome inequalities in culture. We want to hear your voice, because your suggestions and recommendations will help to define and shape the idea of the concept of fair culture, so it become an integral part of public policies in the future. We are a live hybrid event with different digital platforms, so please allow me to give you a few technical indications or guidelines. For those of you joining us via Zoom, please be so kind and keep your video and audio turned off during the entire event. But don't worry, somewhat further down the road, in our thematic sessions, you will be able to make yourself heard with the chat options in Zoom. And for those of you who are with me in this auditorium, you were given cards and you can share your written ideas and suggestions later on. Please be so kind to keep your mask on at all times. We still have certain COVID restrictions in Mexico City. Thank you so much. Language should not be a barrier today. You can write your ideas in English, Spanish, German, or French. And we have, of course, wonderful translators on board who will help us throughout the day with simultaneous translations for English and Spanish. I would like to introduce you now to two of our special guests who will deliver some welcoming remarks. Joining us now with a video message are Johannes Ebert, Secretary General of the Goethe-Institut Germany, and Maria Böhmer, President of the German Commission for UNESCO. Please, roll the videos.
Good morning, dear Patricia Ariza, Minister of Culture of Colombia, dear Ernesto Tone Ramirez, Assistant Director General for Culture of UNESCO, Ambassador Véronique Rocher-Lacan, Permanent Delegate of France to UNESCO, and Ambassador Peter Reuss, Permanent Delegate of Germany to UNESCO. Dear guests, it's a pleasure to welcome you here today. I'm honored to welcome you all in both my roles as Secretary General of the Goethe-Institut and at the same time as President of UNIC, the network of the European Union National Institutes for Culture. The first MONDIACULT World Conference on Cultural Policies took place in Mexico in 1982. Today, 40 years later, Mexico is once again hosting this international conference, bringing together important stakeholders in the cultural field from all over the world. In light of this historic event, it is an honor for the Goethe-Institut to host the side event of the UNESCO World Conference MONDIACULT 2022, and be assured I'm not happy that I cannot be with you personally. The Goethe-Institut works across 98 countries worldwide, delivering language and educational programs as well as a wide range of culture programs. Today's event, Fair Culture, a key to sustainable development, touches upon crucial questions and topics that have been relevant to the Goethe-Institut since its founding. The importance of a fair culture and the need for an international discussion about the topic become particularly evident in the times of crises we live in. The Russian attack on Ukraine not only has an impact on civil society and cultural life in Ukraine, but also affects other regions. Thus, the work of cultural and civil society initiatives has become more difficult in many respects. Additionally, the pandemic also had severe impacts on the work of cultural workers worldwide and further highlighted the inequalities between countries of the Global South and Global North. However, at the same time, this time of crisis forces us to think outside the box and question existing structures. This in turn creates opportunities to discuss international cooperation among cultural practitioners. Goethe-Institut aligns its work closely with the 17 SDGs of the United Nations. For example, in the North American region, we last year presented the regional project Our Sustainable Future. This project brought together students and their teachers from Germany, Guatemala, Mexico, and the United States, who developed visionary project ideas and green startups concepts for a more sustainable future. Furthermore, the principle of sustainability also defines various other educational programs in this region. In the North America, Central America, and Caribbean region alone, we collaborate closely with more than 30 cultural centers, all working towards an equitable exchange across culture and education. Also for UNIC, whose members are European cultural institutions working with local partner organizations around the world, the SDGs and fair collaboration are key topics. UNIC explored the question of what fair collaboration in cultural relations means and what it can look like in international cooperation with partners. A group of experts was commissioned to create a toolkit which can help cultural institutions implement fair practices in their cultural relations work. The Fair Collaboration Toolkit provides concrete ideas, recommendations, and instruments for working with partners in local settings in a fair way. It is openly available on the UNIC website. Today's event offers a first impetus to break new ground and create a fair playing field for cultural practitioners worldwide. I would like to thank the German Commission for UNESCO as well as the partners, the International Federation of Coalitions for Cultural Diversity, the UNESCO Chair on Diversity of Cultural Expression at the University of Laval in Québec, Canada, the Ministry for Culture of Colombia, and the National Commissions for UNESCO France, Kenya, and Korea for taking the initiative and organized this important contribution to fair culture. I wish you fruitful discussions and look forward to new food for thought. Enjoy today's event.
I extend to you a warm welcome on behalf of the German Commission for UNESCO. Welcome to this side event one day ahead of the historic UNESCO World Conference on Cultural Policies and Sustainable Development, MONDIACULT 2022. We are very honored to be an official part of this conference, the third in history. I thank our partners for this fruitful cooperation. I have to single out the Goethe-Institut for physically hosting our event today. A warm welcome and special thanks to our panelists. Today, we want to send a strong signal for fair cooperation in the cultural sector across borders, for decent and fair living and working conditions for artists and cultural professionals worldwide. In short, for fair culture. We are able to base our discussion upon the excellent study on fair culture, which the German Commission for UNESCO had commissioned in 2022. Thank you, Professor Goethe-Institut, for your remarkable work and sharing your expertise with us today. Thanks to the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development for the financial support. The idea of fair culture is not entirely new. We have worked on it already over more than 5 years. To observe that this idea can indeed become a movement, and it already unfolds in debates and hands-on cooperation. We are fully committed to further support the fair culture movement in the years to come, together with our international partners and as part of a fantastic global network of national commissions for UNESCO. Fair culture is a promise. It will only be successful if we are able to build a collaborative and active coalition. Fair culture needs alliance on every political level. Dear Minister for Culture of Colombia, Your Excellency Patricia Ariza, we are pleased to welcome you in this alliance on this side event. UNESCO is the one multilateral organization that is able to build these coalitions. UNESCO is and has always been the driving force behind the recognition of the importance of culture. Thank you, ADG Otone, for your support in these efforts. Today, we want to take the next step towards this coalition through an open, transparent exchange. We want to encourage you to discuss not only opportunities, but also challenges for fair culture. The urgency of fair culture has significantly grown in the last few years. The conditions for the production, dissemination, and consumption of art and cultural goods and services have got worse. The COVID-19 pandemic made the situation even more serious. Additionally, global warming, wars and crises, and a vastly unregulated digital transformation threaten culture. That is why our side event is taking place at a critical point of time. We need to build commitment and integrated efforts for the long term. I therefore thank you, our young experts for fair culture, for joining this debate. Fair culture fully supports all goals of the MONDIACULT conference. Fair culture fully supports acknowledging culture as a global public good. Fair culture fully supports strengthening human rights and artists' rights. Fair culture fully supports a stronger role for culture in the post-2030 agenda. Dear guests, I'm looking forward to our event today and its effects that I'm sure will unfold for a fair future. I wish you all a very fruitful discussion. Thank you for your interest and commitment.
Thank you so much for these welcome words to Johannes Ebert and Maria Böhmer. And we want to extend the welcoming with the intervention of Ernesto Otone Ramirez, who is Assistant Director General of the UNESCO of Culture, and is so kind as to deliver some welcoming remarks to you here live at the auditorium. Bienvenido, Ernesto.
Dankeschön. So, señor, I will speak in Spanish. Oh, I will change it. Entonces voy a hablar en español. Señor Johannes Ebert, secretario general del Goethe-Institut Global y presidente de UNIC. Señora Maria Böhmer, presidenta de la Comisión Alemana para la UNESCO. Distinguida ministra. Aló, ¿me escuchan ahí? No se han perdido nada. No. Más fácil, gracias. Distinguida ministra, distinguidos embajadores, distinguidos participantes. Primero, déjenme decirles que es un placer darle la bienvenida a este evento que llega como antesala de MONDIACULT, sobre un concepto que lo escucharon en las dos intervenciones, habla de cultura justa, una clave para el desarrollo sostenible. Aquí, en esta estupenda sala del Goethe-Institut de la Ciudad de México. A principios de este año, la UNESCO lanzó el informe global Repensar las políticas para la creatividad, plantear la cultura como un bien público global o mundial, que será sin duda uno de los objetivos principales de las discusiones que tendremos en MONDIACULT durante estos 3 días que se sucederán. En este informe, lo que se intentaba era plantear una visión global sobre las políticas públicas y tendencias actuales en los sectores culturales y creativos. Ese informe reveló que a pesar del creciente consumo de contenidos culturales en todo el mundo, persisten importantes desigualdades entre los países desarrollados y los países en desarrollo, y los medios de vida de muchos artistas y profesionales, trabajadores de la cultura, siguen siendo precarios. Aunque la cultura y la creatividad representa más o menos el 6 a 7% de todo el empleo a nivel global, los profesionales que trabajan en el ámbito creativo siguen siendo inestables y a menudo, para no decir la mayoría de las veces, informales. Este informe nace como un análisis de 4 años del trabajo extraordinario que hacen los Estados miembros a través de sus comisiones nacionales para alimentar un informe que es el informe Repensar. Uno de los grandes desafíos de MONDIACULT en los próximos días será de qué modo cada una de las instancias de lo que se llama el proceso de monitoring de las distintas instrumentos, que sean convenciones o que sean recomendaciones, podamos lograr tener un informe global general que nos permita tener la información necesaria para que los Estados miembros puedan, o en este caso la UNESCO, pueda ayudarlo no solo en compartir experiencias exitosas en los países, sino también entregar herramientas para poder proyectar lo que son sus políticas públicas. La desigualdad de género es uno de los temas y sigue siendo un reto fundamental. Las mujeres en el ámbito creativo están sistemáticamente infrarrepresentadas en los puestos de liderazgo y reciben menos acceso a la financiación pública y a la oportunidad de ese desarrollo profesional. En los últimos años hemos escuchado frecuentemente que las brechas se han acortado. Las cifras no nos dicen exactamente eso. Y es importante que el tema de género siga siendo un puntal en los estudios que hacemos para equiparar un poco la cancha. Aunque las exportaciones mundiales de bienes y servicios culturales se han duplicado en la última década, el mercado internacional sigue estando dominado por los países en desarrollo, que representan, y estos son cifras, 95% de todas las exportaciones de servicios culturales. La UNESCO dispone hoy en día de 2 herramientas que nosotros consideramos clave para hacer frente a estos retos y apoyar la condición del artista. La primera es la Convención sobre la Protección y Promoción de la Diversidad de Expresiones Culturales, más conocida como la Convención del 2005, y la famosa recomendación sobre la condición del artista, que ya se remonta a 1980, o sea, incluso antes del primer MONDIACULT. Hoy en día hay un ejercicio de consulta que se está haciendo a todos los países para ver no solo cuáles son las políticas que se han puesto en ejercicio con respecto a esta recomendación, pero también ver, después sobre todo de estos 2 años de pandemia, cuáles son las propuestas, no solo en el espacio digital, pero también en el espacio físico, de dar condiciones. Y ahí el concepto mencionado hace un instante con respecto, que nosotros generalmente hablamos de la remuneración justa, de la dignidad del creador en la sociedad. Pero cuando estamos hablando de justicia, en el concepto de lo justo, sin duda es fundamental entenderlo en un contexto donde ayer lo mencionaba, el año 2020, el año de mayor recaudación y suscripciones a todas las plataformas numéricas, fue el año de menor ingreso para los creadores. Por lo tanto, hay que cuestionarse si el sistema está siendo justo, está siendo redistributivo. Y por lo tanto, una de las grandes discusiones que se nos viene y donde la Unión Europea ha avanzado considerablemente es revisar las políticas con respecto a la esfera digital. Y hoy en día ver de qué modo ellos también pueden participar en la financiación de los creadores de una manera más equitable y más justa. Al ratificar la Convención del 2005, los países desarrollados se comprometen a aplicar medidas de trato preferencial, el famoso concepto de trato preferencial que muchas veces está en los acuerdos económicos, que faciliten el acceso de bienes y servicios culturales en los países en desarrollo. Sin embargo, solo el 12% de los países desarrollados declaran haber concedido dicho acceso en los últimos 4 años. Las conclusiones del informe global de la UNESCO se repiten en el estudio conceptual Cultura Justa, una clave para el desarrollo sostenible, que fue realizado por la cátedra y gran aliado de la UNESCO de la diversidad cultural de la Universidad de Laval, o Québec, con el apoyo del Ministerio Federal de Cooperación Económica y Desarrollo de Alemania. Y estos datos que contienen deberían ser un llamado de atención para los actores del ecosistema cultural sobre lo que recae en la responsabilidad de apoyar una cultura justa. Señoras y señores, la creación de un sector cultural más justo e inclusivo requerirá, por supuesto, de un nuevo reconocimiento de lo que significa la cultura como un bien público global. Y eso constituye uno de los objetivos claves de MONDIACULT. Debemos redoblar nuestro esfuerzo para apoyar los derechos culturales, y estos también los derechos, específicamente de los pueblos indígenas. Un nuevo compromiso será necesario especialmente por parte de todos los países para promover la movilidad de los artistas y la medida del trato diferente. Para terminar, creemos que renovar nuestro esfuerzo en consonancia con esta famosa recomendación de 1980 sobre el Estatuto del Artista para garantizar la remuneración justa de los artistas, su dignidad dentro de la sociedad y defender sus derechos sociales y económicos será la clave, sin duda, principal de este encuentro que tendremos. El acto de hoy será, y estoy convencido, una plataforma clave para debatir estos y otras muchas cuestiones que hoy en día nos preocupan. Y con toda sinceridad me gustaría agradecerle a la Comisión Alemana ante la UNESCO, que es un socio estratégico para nosotros, y a todos los socios hoy día presentes. Veo también a los representantes de Indonesia ahí y otros amigos, por su apoyo permanente a nuestra organización y por su compromiso con la promoción de un sector cultural más sostenible, inclusivo, justo y digno. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Ernesto Otone Ramirez, for your warm words. I am joined now on this stage by Miguel Ángel Munguía. Él es presidente de la Coordinadora Latinoamericana del Caribe de Pequeños Productores y Trabajadores de Comercio Justo y miembro del Consejo de Fair Trade International. Miguel Ángel Munguía nos va a hablar de las similitudes que existen entre uno o una artista y un pequeño productor o productora o trabajador, trabajadora. Adelante.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. No, está bien así. Muchas gracias. Muy buenos días a todos y a todas. Es un agradecimiento enorme de nuestra parte la invitación para compartir con cada una y cada uno de ustedes este evento. Si bien es cierto que hoy tengo una responsabilidad internacional, soy vicepresidente de Fairtrade International. En mi carácter de mexicano les doy la bienvenida a todos y a todas. Yo quiero platicarles sobre lo que hacemos en comercio justo y de qué manera podemos hacer, muchas gracias, de qué manera podemos hacer un vínculo entre comercio justo, un movimiento que tiene muchos años, y esta cultura justa que es fundamental. Pasamos a la siguiente, por favor. Uno de los primeros cuestionamientos que me hago o que nos hacemos, ¿me apoyan con la siguiente? La siguiente no cambia. Hay un problema técnico al parecer. Ya está. Yo me pregunto, ¿qué similitud hay entre un artista y un pequeño productor o productora, trabajador o trabajadora? ¿Qué similitud? La siguiente. Sí, la siguiente, por favor. Creo que hay un problema técnico. Voy a checar mi tiempo para no tener dificultades con los 10 minutos asignados. ¿Me apoyan con la siguiente, por favor? Creo que hay algún problema ahí. Ya está. Bueno, creo que ambos se caracterizan por la dedicación, por la experiencia, por la ardua labor. Ambos tienden a ser desfavorecidos, es un hecho. En un contexto de pandemia, yo me atrevería a decir que los artistas han llegado a ser tendencialmente desfavorecidos. Nosotros como pequeños productores hemos seguido nuestra actividad. Yo soy pequeño productor de miel, tengo una cooperativa de 800 apicultores en la península de Yucatán, en México, y tenemos la certificación orgánica y Fairtrade, y digo felizmente, a mis abejas no le dio COVID. La cosecha de café continuó, la cosecha de cacao continuó. Sí, la pandemia nos pegó en términos de logística, no había contenedores, no había posibilidad de desplazar nuestro producto, había muchas dificultades y nos está pegando en términos de crisis económica. Sin embargo, nuestra actividad productiva ha continuado, con dificultades, pero ha continuado. Por eso me atrevo a decir que los artistas han sido tendencialmente desfavorecidos en este contexto de pandemia. Vamos a la siguiente. La siguiente. Hay un problema técnico ahí. Ya está. Hay una desigualdad preocupante. Solo comparto algunas cifras. El 1% de la población más rica del mundo es tan rica como el resto del mundo. Esa desigualdad es preocupante. 780 millones de personas viven por debajo del umbral internacional de pobreza. 152 millones de niños todavía están involucrados en el trabajo infantil. El cambio climático, evidentemente, amenaza con revertir los progresos de todos los niveles. La siguiente, por favor. Solo unos elementos de la desigualdad. ¿Me apoyan con la que sigue? Creo que nuestro compañero de equipo técnico a lo mejor no me escucha. Ya está. ¿Quiénes somos en Fairtrade? Somos un movimiento global que nació hace más de 40 años y que ha venido perfeccionando su sistema a lo largo de los años. Hoy día lo integramos las National Fair Organization, las organizaciones que promueven el comercio justo, que sobre todo son las que están pintadas con color azul en el norte global, podemos decir, y las redes de productores que estamos en el sur global, América Latina, África y Asia. A mí me tocó ser presidente de la red de América Latina y ambos, nuestra parte sur global que es productora y la parte norte global que es consumidora, nos unimos para sensibilizar a los consumidores en un modelo de comercio más justo, más ético, que impere la justicia. Vamos al siguiente. La siguiente. Bueno, la red latinoamericana, la nuestra, nació en 2004 Somos 24 países asociados y tenemos 1,008 organizaciones de pequeños productores y trabajadores. Mi cooperativa, Educe Cooperativa, es una de esas 1,008 en la península de Yucatán. En ese mapa pueden ver cuántas organizaciones tenemos en cada país. En México tenemos 77 productores de cacao, de café, de jugo de naranja y de miel. Ahí me toca ser uno de los productores de miel. La siguiente, por favor. ¿Cuál es la visión que tenemos en Fairtrade? ¿Cuál es la visión? Gracias. ¿Cuál es la visión? El comercio justo es un modelo comercial que pone al centro los seres humanos y la sostenibilidad social, económica y ambiental en las sociedades, dignificando el trabajo, respetando el medio ambiente y fomentando una gestión responsable y sostenible de los recursos humanos. Hago énfasis en que nosotros ponemos en el centro al ser humano, los derechos humanos. El otro tipo de comercio pone en el centro como prioridad el producto. El producto va por encima de la explotación de mano de obra infantil, el producto va por encima de los derechos humanos, el producto va por encima del medio ambiente. Nosotros es al revés, el modelo de comercio nuestro es al revés. Primero son los derechos humanos, primero es el medio ambiente. Vamos a la siguiente. ¿De qué manera trabajamos? Tenemos un precio mínimo que es determinado a partir de los costos de producción. En nuestro caso, en mi ejemplo, como productor de miel, ¿cuánto me cuesta adquirir una caja? ¿Cuánto me cuesta adquirir la cera? ¿Cuánto me cuesta ir al apiario a recolectar la miel, a llevar agua en época de calor? ¿Cuánto nos cuesta poner la miel en un tambor? ¿Cuánto nos cuesta transportarla al puerto? ¿Cuánto nos cuesta exportarla? Se fijan los costos de producción, se hace un estudio a nivel global y se fija un precio mínimo de referencia que cubre esos costos mínimos de producción. Ese precio es un precio justo, cubre los costos de producción. Hay adicionalmente una prima social que está determinada en función de cada producto. Normalmente es el 20, en nuestro caso son 20 centavos de dólar al kilo. Que esa prima social se destina para labores de carácter colectivo. Centros de salud donde no hay, becas para los niños, infraestructura en las plantas de procesamiento de miel, de café y demás. Eso es el premio social, ahí se destina. Transparencia es otro de nuestros valores. Estamos convencidos de que si no presentamos cuentas claras, no se logra formar las organizaciones. Muchas veces en campo, el fracaso de muchas organizaciones de pequeños productores y trabajadores tiene que ver por la falta de transparencia, por líderes corruptos que no son transparentes en sus procesos. Ese es un valor fundamental. La democracia también, Asamblea General, como un órgano máximo de decisión que decide año con año en su asamblea las líneas estratégicas y nombra a sus directivos por un periodo determinado de 3 a 5 años según la normativa interna. No discriminación, un valor fundamental, ni por sexo, ni preferencia religiosa, ni preferencias políticas, ni por color, ni por raza, de ningún tipo. En nuestras organizaciones no se permite. Compromiso ambiental, nosotros tenemos una lista de productos prohibidos que han sido altamente dañinos para el medio ambiente. Y muchos de nosotros, además de producir un sistema agroecológico, hemos transitado a certificaciones orgánicas. Nuestra miel, en mi caso, tiene la doble certificación mencionada. Nuestra miel está certificada orgánica, validada por el DAF en Alemania, validada por BioSuisse en Suiza, validada por la ANOP en los Estados Unidos. Entonces nosotros podemos vender un producto orgánico y muchas de mis organizaciones hermanas están en ese carácter orgánico y Fairtrade. Y el tema de jóvenes y mujeres es vital. O sea, ya lo decía hace rato el compañero Otón ya lo decía. El tema de género es fundamental. Buscamos la equidad, hemos luchado contra ello. Evidentemente una cultura patriarcal tiene que trabajar muchísimo, tanto con hombres como con mujeres. Fundamentalmente yo diría con hombres la nueva masculinidad. Es un desafío. Y el tema de jóvenes es desafiante en tanto que nuestro campesinado latinoamericano y yo diría global nos estamos envejeciendo. O sea, hay mucha gente de edad avanzada en el campo y se necesita el relevo generacional. Vamos a la siguiente. Estamos muy comprometidos con los valores, los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible de Naciones Unidas. los pongo todos y luego hago un resumen breve con los cuales nosotros como Movimiento Fair Trade estamos comprometidos. Pasamos a la que sigue. A la que sigue, la que sigue. Tienen que ser generosos conmigo, devolverme mi tiempo sobre estos minutitos técnicos que he perdido. Perdón por la broma. Nosotros tenemos un plan estratégico a 5 años que tiene estos 5 componentes. Queremos que todos nuestros productores y trabajadores estén empoderados. Tenemos una estrategia de crecimiento e innovación también. Incidencia y participación ciudadana. Esta es una cuestión de política pública con el cual, entre paréntesis, puse MONDIACULT, porque creo que podemos hacer una alianza importante entre el movimiento Fair Trade Internacional y el movimiento cultural. Digitalización para las cadenas de suministro más justas, o sea, la trazabilidad y los datos son importantes. Un consumidor en Francia, en Alemania, en Suiza, quiere saber si el precio justo que él pagó le llegó al productor. En la comunidad de Soncahuis, en Yucatán, donde yo vivo, o en la comunidad cercana de Nairobi, en Kenia, o en la comunidad del Chimborazo, dependiendo de la región, ellos quieren saber. Entonces, esto nos permite demostrar a los consumidores que efectivamente el precio justo que ellos pagan llega al productor. Y bueno, queremos también cimientos para el futuro, en el cual creo que también podemos trabajar en alianza con MONDIACULT. Estos son 5 objetivos estratégicos que están a 2025. Hicimos este trabajo desde 2019-2020, están a 2025. En la web de Fair Trade International pueden encontrar el detalle. Vamos a la siguiente. ¿Qué indicadores contemplamos y cómo los ligo con los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible? Indicadores medibles y conectados. En uno de los más importantes, que es el fin de la pobreza. En 2030 queremos que los agricultores y trabajadores Fair Trade en nuestros productos principales recibirán un ingreso y un salario digno. En 2030, para el tema de igualdad de género, los órganos de decisión de Fair Trade y sus organizaciones miembros estarán compuestas por al menos el 50% de mujeres, personas de origen racial diverso y jóvenes menores a 50 años. Quiero decirles que en este objetivo, hoy día en el BOR, en la Junta Directiva de Fair Trade International, ya lo cumplimos. Hoy día somos 11 en la Junta Directiva de Fair Trade International, y de las cuales son 6 mujeres y somos 5 hombres. Tenemos 4 representantes de las National Fair Organization y 4 representantes de las redes de productores y 3 independientes. Somos 11 en el conjunto del Board de Fair Trade International. A mí me toca representar a las redes de productores en el sur global y tengo una responsabilidad compartida de la vicepresidencia. Represento a la red de productores y mi otro colega vicepresidente representa a las National Fair Organization. Pero hoy día tenemos más mujeres en el board que hombres, 6 mujeres y 5 hombres. Nos falta el desafío de los jóvenes, evidentemente, pero estamos con esa perspectiva. El otro, trabajo decente y crecimiento económico. En 2030, todos los trabajadores agrícolas Fair Trade tendrán un contrato formal de trabajo. En República Dominicana, por ejemplo, hay mucha migración de Haití. Y estamos trabajando para que los inmigrantes que van de Haití hacia Dominicana tengan contratos justos de trabajo en las plantaciones de banano. Son grandes desafíos porque el mercado es volátil. Sin embargo, estamos trabajando en torno a ello y se van logrando avances. En el otro objetivo, el objetivo de, disculpen, pero es que esa chiquita está muy lenta, está muy chiquita, de industria, innovación e infraestructura. En 2030, todas las cadenas de valor Fair Trade serán trazables y transparentes. Para lograr este objetivo, invertiremos recursos considerables y forjaremos alianzas con otras organizaciones relevantes. Estaremos particularmente interesados en tecnologías desarrolladas en el sur. Esta parte es fundamental. Luego, producción y consumo responsable. En 2030 los consumidores reconocerán a Fair Trade como una prioridad tanto en los 7 mercados principales. Quiero decirles que uno de los mercados importantes es el café, el cacao, el banano, el azúcar, las flores, las plantas, el té y el algodón. La miel, el producto que yo tengo, forma parte de los no tan importantes en términos de volumen, sin embargo, importante en términos ambientales, decimos nosotros, por lo que hacen las abejas en términos de polinización y favorecen la biodiversidad. Queremos que en un lapso de 10 años, hasta 2030, perdón, haya 10 productos dinámicos y activos que nos permitan mejores condiciones para los productores. Demanda de productos fair trade en 10 mercados. Y en 2030 también contemplamos alianza para lograr los objetivos. O sea, en 2030 fair trade se habrá convertido en un sector global en la lucha contra el cambio climático, en virtud de ser parte de una alianza global en la cual también participan gobiernos, sector privado, organizaciones de la sociedad civil. Sobre esto comentarles que tenemos universidades que promueven el comercio justo y tenemos muchos acuerdos a nivel global, pueblos que promueven el comercio justo y que la actividad cultural que ustedes promuevan también es importante. Vamos a la siguiente. Brevemente los datos de impacto. Gracias al Fair Trade todavía hoy día hay un ingresos salarios dignos en Costa de Marfil y Ghana. Los trabajadores bananeros reciben ya un ingreso digno. Los productores de cacao reportan mejorías en sus condiciones de vida. La revolución digital ha comenzado con una plataforma que le llamamos Fair Insight. Vamos a la siguiente. El cambio climático es percibido evidentemente como una amenaza para nosotros como productores. La tecnología como garantía de transparencia en las cadenas de valor es clave, con lo que yo les hablaba del Fair Insight. La agilidad e innovación en las palabras es clave. Estamos desarrollando una estrategia de mercados en el sur. Hay una expectativa muy grande en Fair Trade de hablar en una sola voz, es decir, como un movimiento global. Nosotros somos comercio, pero como un movimiento. Y el precio mínimo y la prima de Fair Trade han permitido mejorar las condiciones de vida e invertir en infraestructura, salud, educación, seguridad alimentaria. Vamos a la siguiente. Y con esta termino. Una alianza, diría yo, como conclusión, entre artistas, entre MONDIACULT y el Fair Trade podría contribuir sustancialmente a un mundo más equitativo, que es lo que buscamos. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a Miguel Ángel Munguía. Muchas gracias por tus palabras. I now would like to welcome on the stage Véronique Guévremont, holder of the UNESCO Chair on the Diversity of Cultural Expressions at the University in Laval, Québec, Canada. Véronique is the author of a study on fair culture that was commissioned by the German Commission of UNESCO. She will introduce us to this study, its objectives, and some of the results which will help us today to get a deeper understanding on the concept of fair culture. Your floor, Véronique. Would you like to hold it like this?
I can do it. If you can stand, that would be great.
This way? No, the other way.
Yes.
Maybe you can adjust it.
And there's also a PowerPoint. It's going to be on the screen, the PowerPoint. No, that's fine. Thank you. Buenos días. Good morning. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. It's an honor to be here in Mexico to present our study. A study that I conducted with Maxime Mariage, which is also here with us today. Next slide, please. So the objective of our study is to reflect on various means that can be considered to make cultural relations more equitable and sustainable. Next slide. It reflects more specifically on how a fair culture concept could stimulate commercial and non-commercial exchange of cultural goods and services, how it could promote the mobility of artists and other cultural professionals from the Global South, how to improve their remuneration, how it could contribute to strengthening local and regional markets, and how it could involve multinational enterprises in a new form of partnership aimed at promoting the status of artists and fulfilling cultural rights for all. Next slide. Before I go any further, I'd like to say that our reflections and recommendations for actions to which I will return at the end of this presentation were informed by several sources, including more than 300 texts and several dozens of experts who participated in interviews or reviewed an early version of our study. And some of them are here with us today. So we would like to thank them all for their valuable contribution. Next slide, please. So when we started this project, one of our first concerns was to determine what would be the added value of a fair culture concept. Next slide. As we all know, several instruments and initiatives are already in place to improve the condition of artists, like the 1980 recommendations that we talked about before, or to stimulate cooperation and cultural exchanges between the global north and the global south. And this is the case of the 2005 convention, among other initiatives. So why would we need a new tool, a new initiatives? Next slide. Well, probably because despite the progress that has been made, that has been achieved thanks to these instruments, inequity persists in the cultural relations and trade flows remain totally unbalanced. Next slide. So several challenges still need to be met, and our study draws attention on various issues that should be considered in the deployment of a fair culture movement. And sorry, there was a list before of such challenges that still need to be addressed. In addition, there is an urgent need to further mobilize non-state actors, in particular multinationals in the cultural sectors, including digital platforms. And here, initiative in other sectors should inspire us, such as the fair trade movement, but also other instruments that are setting out a due diligence standards for multinationals. Next slide. So taking these few elements into account, we came up with a concept of fair culture based on three distinct but interdependent pillars, each of these necessary to promote and balance cultural exchanges between the global north and the global south. These pillars are fair cultural trade, fair cultural cooperation, and fair cultural partnership. So let me now say a few words about each of them. Next slide. Fair cultural trade requires a better implementation of Article 16 of the 2005 Convention on Preferential Treatment. While this provision, one of the most binding commitments of this instrument, is at the heart of the system of international cooperation set up by this treaty, it has not yet properly been used or activated by the parties to the convention. Preferential treatments rests on the principle of non-reciprocity, a recognition of the unequal conditions in which the different parties to the convention find themselves and the unequal means at their disposal to contribute to the protection and promotion of the diversity of cultural expressions. This is why it is such an important provision of the 2005 Convention. And there are several ways to implement preferential treatment. For instance, it may derive from a free trade agreement. After the adoption of the 2005 Convention, some trade agreements have been negotiated to incorporate cultural preferential treatment clauses, such as a commitment for co-produced film to receive the benefit of domestic films, such as financial assistance or protection by quotas. However, these agreements are too few in numbers. Preferential treatment may also derive from cultural initiatives, such as the creation of artistic residencies exclusively dedicated to artists from the South, or the deployment of measures facilitating the entry of artists from the Global South on the territory of northern countries. But as shown by the periodical reports of the parties to the 2005 Convention, implementations of Article 16 remains largely insufficient. And this should be addressed by a fair cultural movement. Next slide, please. The second pillar is fair cultural cooperation. Inspired by the principle of fair trade, thank you, our study suggests 6 core principles for fair cultural relations based on the specificities of CCIs. Again, improving access to global markets for artists from the Global South would remain a guiding principle, just as it is when implementing preferential treatment. But the idea here would be to go further and mobilize not only states, but also private actors and civil society organizations. Fair remuneration would, of course, be central, as it is the only way to ensure artistic freedom and social justice. Fair trade could also inspire new ways of strengthening capacities. For example, fair trade uses a premium, which is an additional sum that could, in the CCI sector, take the form of a tax, a fee, collected from multinationals involved in the creation, production, or dissemination of cultural content. This premium could then be reinvested either in the creation of new content, infrastructure, or social protection for artists and cultural professionals from the Global South. Finally, just as it is the case with the fair trade movement, a fair culture movement could not be successful without investing efforts in raising awareness of consumers about the conditions faced by artists and cultural professionals in the Global South. Next slide. As for the third pillar, fair cultural partnerships, it requires more specifically involving multinational enterprises in a new form of partnership aimed at promoting the status of artists and respecting their rights, social, economic, and cultural rights. We all know that digital technologies offer tremendous opportunity for artists and cultural professionals. However, and this is also widely recognized, the digital economic model can be detrimental to the diversity of cultural expressions and the fulfillment of fundamental rights, including cultural rights for all. So, drawing on the recent normative developments on corporate social responsibility and due diligence standards mentioned earlier, states from the global north could define a specific framework for their multinationals involved in the CCI sector to comply with a due diligence standard. Such a framework could also encourage these enterprises to invest in creation, production, discoverability of local content, including on digital platform, create partnerships with local companies, and promote local languages. Next slide. So finally, our study proposes 6 actions that could be deployed to launch a fair culture movement built on these 3 pillars. Next slide, please. The first action, which should be implemented as a priority to initiate the movement, could be the launch of a fair culture charter, which could serve as a reference document setting out the general principles of fair and sustainable cultural relations. The 6 core principles mentioned previously could serve as a basis for the development of the charter. The 5 other suggested action would allow to go further. First, by adapting the principle to the specificities of each sector of the CCI. a framework for action aimed at defining a label, a certification process, and a strategy for monitoring fair cultural relations could also be developed. Next slide, please. A reflection on due diligence standard applicable to multinationals in the CCI sector, as well as the imposition of a tax, a fee, a form of premium, could also be launched. And finally, a plan to stimulate the implementation of Article 16 on preferential treatment of the 2005 Convention could be elaborated, in particular to improve the mobility of artists and other cultural professionals from the global south. Of course, I invite you to read the study for more details, and I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veronique. We will now elaborate a little bit further on these ideas with a panel of experts we have here. Please, may I ask to join me on this stage. Our panel of experts, please. Welcome, everybody. Let me introduce you to our panel. Joining us is Jorge Sánchez Rosas. Bienvenido. Él es productor de cine y miembro de la EU UNESCO Expert Facility for Cultural Diversity. And we are connected online right now to Keith Nurse. Welcome. Bonjour. He is the principal of Sir Arthur Lewis Community College in Castries, St. Lucia. And to my left, I would like to welcome Maria Mangiate, who is a program officer of the network Young Experts for Fair Culture at the Observatory of Cultural Policies in Africa, which has its headquarters in Maputo, Mozambique. Welcome. And of course, you already know Miguel Ángel Munguia, who is also present on this panel to discuss a little bit further the ideas brought forward by Veronique. Since we are a little bit over our time expectations today, I would like you to be quite short in your introductory statements. And I would like you, oh, I forgot about Friederike. I'm so sorry. Joining us also from Germany via Zoom is Friederike Kircher. How could I miss that? Head of Division of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Guten Abend nach Deutschland.
Guten Abend.
It's a pleasure to have you with us. And I would like to ask you, Jorge, to start with a short introductory statement, if you may. Let me give you.
Hola, hola. Muchas gracias. Y quisiera ir directamente al grano, es decir, ¿qué influencia tienen las posiciones políticas en las decisiones de organismos como la UNESCO u otros de cooperación internacional? Saludo con mucho honor a la ministra de Cultura de Colombia, dadas las recientes elecciones en que salió electo el presidente Petro. Gracias por estar aquí. Y quisiera señalar dos ejemplos que me permitirán ejemplificar lo que es la incidencia de la política en lo que son las relaciones de cooperación y colaboración internacional. En este sentido, me voy a permitir poner dos ejemplos. Espero ser lo suficientemente breve e inteligente para poder exponerlos. Uno de ellos es la existencia de la Fundación del Nuevo Cine Latinoamericano, que tiene su sede en La Habana y que fue creada a iniciativa de Gabriel García Márquez, de Fidel Castro y de un colega cubano recién fallecido, que fue Julio García Espinosa. Esta fundación creó la Escuela Internacional de Cine y Televisión de San Antonio de los Baños. Y esta ha pasado la pandemia en actividad. Es decir, yo creo que no podríamos tener una aspiración más justa que la de crear un audiovisual regional. Es decir, que refleje nuestros propios intereses, posibilidades y capacidades. Y esta Escuela Internacional de Cine y Televisión de San Antonio de los Baños ve restringida su actividad por la falta de cooperación. Cuando hablamos de números, no resulta significativo que cuesta anualmente en divisas, porque recordemos que está en Cuba. Cuba tiene un tratamiento especial para las divisas y el peso nacional, pero en divisas no representa más allá de 500,000 euros anualmente. Esto puede ser solucionado por aportaciones en líquido, por aportaciones de salarios de profesores y por boletos de avión. En el caso opuesto, tenemos un organismo que se llama Ibermedia. Este organismo Ibermedia depende de la CEGIB, Secretaría Ejecutiva de Gobiernos de Iberoamérica. Y esta se creó en 1995 gracias a la iniciativa y el interés de España por tener un organismo de esta naturaleza. Este organismo ha logrado resistir, crecer y desarrollarse a lo largo de los últimos casi 30 años, gracias a la cooperación internacional y especialmente a las variables que se han tenido en la vida política de España, Brasil, Argentina y México. Y quiero decir esto, espero haber sido lo suficientemente específico, que la política incide en las políticas de cooperación internacional de los organismos internacionales. Muchas gracias.
No, muchas gracias a ti, Jorge. Si quieres ponlo ahí simplemente en la mesa, está bien así. We now would like to welcome again Keith Nurse. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here. I can hear you loud and clear.
Would like to listen to your short, brief introductory statement. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be participating in this MONDIACULT. Unfortunately, I'm not able to be with you physically. Nonetheless, I think the presentation by Veronique and the comments from the earlier special guests and advisors, I think have set the groundwork for our discussions for the rest of the day. I particularly want to thank Veronique for that very comprehensive report on fair culture. It provides an important, I think, benchmark and platform for us to build upon. And the number of action areas that were identified, I think are very solid. One of the key things that was identified is, creating a charter, a set of expectations on either side for all parties. I think that's really important. We need to come to this issue of fair culture with a clearer mandate, I think, going forward. The UNESCO 2005 Convention provides the mandate. What I think we need to do is take the process forward. And Veronique indicated that a critical element of this process is the further implementation of Article 16, which speaks about preferential treatment. In a workshop later on today, I will be hosting that particular topic along with my colleague from Finland, Kimmo Oklik. And so we will explore that to a greater degree at that point. The other thing I wanted to say, and this is where sometimes the rubber hits the ground, which is that our capacity to measure the creative sector remains fairly weak in relative terms. And so when we talk about fair culture, we have to be able to identify some goals and some benchmarks of what would represent an achievement. And we need to be able to set targets going forward. And so it is imperative that we create frameworks for the documenting, mapping, and the collating of data on the sector in a more robust way. Because otherwise, we won't know whether we are achieving the result that we want. And also, it also allows us to generate a strategic planning framework. Because we all know, if you're not measuring it, more than likely you're not managing it. And so we need to put that in place to ensure that we get to the point of success that we are all desirous of. The only other point I would make is this: the creative economy is one of the fastest adopters, if not leaders, in the digital trade arena. That being said, what we are seeing is a widening inequality between developed countries and the developing countries. What is then required to bridge that gap, or that digital gap, requires a lot of capacity building in developing countries, but it also requires developing countries to put the cultural sector as a priority sector for engagement. I'll end my comments there, and thank you for your kind encouragement. Thank you.
Statement, Maria Mangiate.
I think the main concern on the creative sector is the value chain. And for us to ensure that we achieve the global ambition on this fair culture, it is critically important. For example, when we're talking about development of a culture and creative industry, we need to ensure that we have infrastructure, we have equipment, we have also resource. Because I look, for example, for Mozambique, is still a big challenge for us to develop the culture and creative industry. Of course, because of the equipment, of the infrastructure, because even if the resource comes, if I'm not yet well prepared, how do I really make sure that I will make the production, I will deliver the service that is required? Because when the funds is allocated, it's not allocated, for example, to support to buy equipment. If we am talking about the cinema, to buy equipment, I have to perform a theater, is a dancer. Where do I go to perform if I don't have the venue? I don't have the address for the artists. So I think it's quite important to, besides give the resource to make the production, it's important to look for this environment. That's why I think it's also very important to ensure approach to culture traditional also and heritage interpretation, include the ability in a way to enrich this value chain that you were talking about and to ensure that it's really built. It's also important to advocate for equality, rights and freedoms, gender balance. When we talk about gender balance, there is also an important aspect. What is most visible? I will repeat again, Mozambique. When they say gender balance, the main consent of have equal number of men and males, but in between there's no communication. So how do I ensure that the needs of that women, the voice of them, it's heard, the voice of men, they heard? Because it's not about the numbers. it's really important to have them communicate, to have them discuss, and it will build the fair discussions in between, and not only have the equal number. So it's also important to have a coherent and innovative culture policies to broaden these rights and freedoms. I repeat again because it's very, very important. And maybe we are now in a digital environment, so I think it's also important to ensure that funds are allocated. It's also important to support the collect data. It will help us to develop the cultural studies, but because it's a gaps, I think it's not all in Africa, but I think it's a gaps worldwide. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Maria. Friederike, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. So thank you. Sorry, am I interrupting? I think the audio needs a little to travel a few miles. Many greetings from Berlin. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, excellencies and dear colleagues. It's a pleasure to be with you, to listen to you today. The German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development financed the study that Veronique and her colleagues worked out with so much detail, so many hours of work. I still remember our very first discussions we had, I think back in 2021 or 2020 actually. And we are delighted that we embarked on this mission for fair culture with the National Commission for UNESCO in Germany. And it's wonderful to see how it's coming to life and how it's being filled with so many good ideas and suggestions, and how it's really growing what we started then. So I just, in my comment, very quickly want to touch upon why German Development Cooperation actually supported this endeavor, this initiative, is still supporting it. So why we actually invest and support creative industries in the culture sector in development cooperation, because this is really pioneer work. We only started about 5 years ago, because we see that from a development point of view, of course, this is a unique sector, a nexus sector for sustainable development. It's a future market, of course, with the economic potential for employment and income. It's a job generator for young people and especially for women. It's a sector that fosters cross-innovation, also into more traditional sectors. It's one that transforms and strengthens digitization, which is, I think, one of the most encompassing movements we've seen with regard to doing business. And of course, it contributes to cultural diversity and also to socioeconomic transformation. But what we are looking for, of course, is not just the quantity of jobs and work, but also the quality of jobs and work. That is to say, fair labor conditions and standards. Because we believe that creativity is a resource just as any other, and it needs protection and fair contracts. So let me briefly expand on what we do to support this movement and this initiative. So we started to promote culture and creative industries together with GIZ and the Goethe-Institut in several countries in Africa and the Middle East. And we actually work with entrepreneurs on the individual level in terms of supporting access to finance and access to markets. We've heard that, very important issues. Also product development, marketing, but we also work with interest groups and service providers, because this industry needs a lobby. It needs a lobby on the local level. And of course, we also work with governments in order to improve framework conditions, for example, tax rebates. And our mantra there really is that we do not just need to speak with the ministers of culture, but with the ministers of finance and ministers of economics. And in order for them to actually implement policies, we need data. So that's another, I think, very important issue. We need data on the economic benefits of this sector, because that will build the strongest arguments for political action. And our ministry has really come up, let me just highlight two initiatives briefly in other sectors that have worked very well. You may have heard of the Green Button. The Green Button is a national state-run certification label of fair textiles and with certain requirements on the level of products and companies. And this initiative really started as a roundtable of stakeholders, and it ultimately led to national supply chain law. And that is now being taken to the European level. So this is also supposed to be encouragement that a roundtable can eventually turn into policies and laws. And the other initiative was one that the G7 took with the African partners. It's called CONNEX initiative. And it's an independent facility that provides legal support to emerging economies and developing countries for fair contract negotiations. So that's another intermediary step that could also be taken in the cultural sector. So in summary, the steps we see ahead, what we need, apart from data, is voice, funds, and scale. So voice would be something, of course, like the UNESCO Fair Culture Charter, something we would support. Funds goes without saying. And scale is to continually to keep thinking big. So why not actually promote creative industries in the World Economic Forum, for example, or even the G7. So to bring culture to other international partners and initiatives to take action. And I will leave it at that, and I'm delighted to listen to other speakers. Thank you.
A short time. If any of you has questions, please write them down, hand them to our staff, which is present in the auditorium. You could also write your questions via Zoom, in the chat option of Zoom. And we have time for 3 or 4 questions, because we now have seen already a number of aspects to fair culture, be it from a civil point of view, what society concerns, the artists, the industries behind it. We have heard from our young expert what needs to happen on site in the different countries. We've heard from Miguel Angel certain parallels that could be established between the fair trade movement and one that supports fair culture. So I guess you have questions, and we have time for 2 or 3 of them, and let's see who wants to answer. So kind, thank you so much. The first question is, how can the concept of fair culture be implemented in historically impoverished countries? Who would like to answer that? Maybe Keith, you want to take this one?
Great, thank you very much. One of the great things about the creative sector is that we're not talking about huge manufacturing operations with large capital-intensive equipment, and so once you have really good internet connectivity, once you have some of the basic required equipment, but most importantly, once you have people who've been trained in the cultural and creative sector and understand how to be creative entrepreneurs, you then need to assist with the process of digital entrepreneurship, which requires a number of capabilities. Most important of which is marketing and trade facilitation, because ultimately, it's one thing to have access to markets. The other thing is to be able to enter those markets. And so creating the frameworks by which that can be done is easily scalable in developing countries, even the poorest of them. The other critical element is really in terms of working with other key sectors like the financial industry and fintech industries to build some of the new financing mechanisms, as well as the mechanisms for the collection of royalty income and other sources of income. And so in effect, what we're talking about is building a digital infrastructure that includes things like blockchain, e-commerce, of course, et cetera, et cetera. So in the past, we used to talk about economies of scale. What we're really talking about here is generating economies of scope so that on multiple platforms and in multiple arenas, these countries are able to access resources, but also to deploy their own capabilities and competencies in areas where they do have a comparative advantage, whether it's in fashion industry or animation or music, film, you name it. So it's possible with the existing technologies. It's just that it has to be done in a very sophisticated way to do what we call innovation upgrading. So thank you very much.
Answer on that. We have another question that may be related, but with a different twist. The question is it possible to apply the idea of fair culture to the domestic situation? That is not only speaking in terms of the international scene, but what about being on ground in a certain country? Can it be applied? What would you say, Maria?
Yes, I think it's possible, because to go globally, we need to start from the ground. So we need to consider what its products in the ground level, because it's not everyone who have the possibility to go, for example, for education in a high-level school. Many of artists, many of designers, products, many of them, they start on the garage. When I talk about the musician, they started like playing some basic guitar. They don't have the vocational, educational, but they can go further. So it's really important to support them so that we can ensure that they go beyond the standard level and maybe for international level. Because if we look only in a very close sector, will not be able to inspire to achieve what we really need. So this is a global ambition. So we need to take everything what is important and what is achievable.
So we construct from bottom up and top down, basically.
Yeah. We can support different stakeholders or different culture players. I think it's important.
Concerning this idea of sustainable development and fair culture, how can that be achieved, Miguel Angel? If you have you were the one who put the idea of fair trade forward as a model for fair culture. How could that help sustainable development, locally and globally?
Sí, bueno, a mí me parece muy interesante, por un lado que la problemática es global, o sea, la problemática no es específica, sino es global en términos de la cultura justa, de la inequidad, y que para ello tenemos que trabajar tanto los que producimos bienes como los que producen servicios. En ese sentido, una alianza es clave en todos los actores. Y escuchar las voces de los que me antecedieron en términos de un marco estratégico, hacer una declaratoria, lo que decía Veronique, hablar de precios justos, hablar de una prima, hablar de debida diligencia, hablar de un comercio norte-norte, norte-sur y sur-sur, de bienes y servicios, o sea, también de los artistas, hablar de la importancia de datos, de la digitalización, hablar de la construcción de estándares, que nosotros tenemos un estándar para cada producto, hablar de cómo hacer desde lo local hasta lo global y desde lo global hasta lo local. Me parece que esos son elementos que favorecen digamos, una cultura más justa. Decirles que en el contexto de pandemia nosotros hemos trabajado por medios digitales. Hemos generado procesos formativos por medios digitales, videos
O sea, la
muy
pandemia
cortos.
también, perdón, como una oportunidad
Exacto,
para la digitalización.
exacto, como una oportunidad. Entonces me parece que ese es un elemento importante y hay similitudes y estamos en la mejor disposición como movimiento Fair Trade a colaborar en la construcción.
Yo creo que tenemos que entrar luego más a fondo, ¿no? En nuestras sesiones temáticas en eso. La pregunta para ti, todo depende nada más de la buena voluntad o tenemos, tú ya lo mencionaste en tu exposición inicial, tenemos instituciones que podían ayudar a implementar estas ideas del fair culture.
Sí, yo creo que hay que fortalecer esas instituciones, hay que darles una flexibilidad y una normatividad adecuada para cada una de las regiones o los países, pero yo creo que en el fondo sí existe un fenómeno de desigualdad que permea las acciones públicas y políticas de los organismos internacionales de cooperación o abocadas a la cultura y a la educación. Yo creo que esa cifra que mencionó Miguel Ángel y que pudimos ver en esa gráfica del 1% poseyendo la mayor cantidad de riqueza, eso nos marca definitivamente. Y si no partimos de eso, yo creo que vamos a dar vueltas sobre un fenómeno que a lo mejor podemos resolver parcialmente por el comercio justo, por ejemplo, tanto en la cultura como en los productos originarios, para llamarles de alguna manera, pero no vamos a lograr las soluciones globales. Yo creo que, y en ese sentido, mi convicción es de que en América Latina estamos yendo hacia posiciones más liberales y en Europa se está yendo hacia posiciones más conservadoras. Sí. Y la elección de Italia nos lo demuestra, esperemos que no sea así, pero esas serían las bases de una cooperación justa y solidaria.
Definitivamente vamos a tener que profundizar sobre eso. Muchas gracias. No se vayan. Friederike, bitte auch bei uns Standby bleiben. Aus Zeitgründen, because of time restrictions, we would like to now to go into work and really start our thematic sessions in which we can, deepen some of the ideas brought forward up to now and work on recommendations we will be able to hand in to the MONDIACULT 2022 World Conference. Could we please see on screen right now the thematic sessions, the slide that announces the 4 sessions? Thank you so much. As you can see, let me just walk you briefly through the dynamic of these sessions. As you can see, we have 4 rooms or 4 thematic sessions. We have 3 rooms that will be conducted via Zoom, and the concept of breakout rooms where you can participate and work. And we have a main session held in this auditorium. Classroom number 1, as you can see in those who are connected in Zoom, they can see that there's the first breakout room is called classroom number 1, that deals with the central question of how to build fair trade conditions for cooperation in the cultural sector. So if you are interested in working in this field for today's sharing of ideas and establishing recommendations, then join this breakout room now. Classroom number 2 takes place here at the Goethe, and for everybody in our YouTube live stream, you will be listening and participating in this main session. Our main goal, thematically speaking, will be to reflect on fair working conditions in the cultural sector. So if you are interested, stay right here and join us in that session. Classroom number 3, as you can see it, in Zoom deals with the diversity of cultural expressions and cultural value chains in times of digitization. We already spoke about that. So if you have ideas on that, if you want to share your expertise and suggestions, join room number 3 at this moment. And finally, breakout classroom number 4 in Zoom tries to find answers to the question of how to make fair culture a holistic approach. So if you want to talk about that, then please do join the breakout room number 4 right now. We are now taking a very short 5-minute, 6-minute, I guess, a health and coffee break. That'll give you the opportunity to have a coffee, to join our breakout rooms, or to stay in this main session. And after the short break, we will start working in the different classrooms. Thank you so much. As I said before, we will be on the issue of fair trade working conditions. Joining me here on our stage is again Jorge Sánchez. Bienvenido de regreso aquí después del break. And the ambassador for the UNESCO of Germany, Peter Reuss. Welcome on the stage. Glad to have you here. What we want to do is take your input, your recommendations, get into a discussion, see if several of the points concerning fair working conditions can be translated into some sort of suggestions or recommendations that we then can hand in conference MONDIACULT 2022. Which starts tomorrow. Okay, so please let me know who is in charge of taking the questions, be it from our auditorium or those joining us via Zoom. Exactly. That is excellent.
Okay.
Maybe we switch that.
So, okay. Okay, just to give you time to ask and to formulate your question, I wanted to start by thanking the Goethe-Institut here in Mexico for this initiative to organize together with the Deutsche UNESCO-Kommission this wonderful discussion, and especially to thank you for allowing this discussion, to allowing this dialogue, and not to present ready-made answers, because the thing I think is so challenging what we are doing today is we don't have answers so far. We have this concept, and thank you, she's not here anymore, Véronique Vraiment and her people from Laval University, and Christine Merkel formerly from the German UNESCO-Kommission, to elaborate this text. How can we translate what we have learned and discussed this morning from fair trade into fair culture? For sure, we can take elements. For sure, we cannot take everything, because culture is a different topic than producing chocolate or wheat or other agricultural products. What is the first problem of the free expression of culture and the working of a free culture? This is by sure war and oppression. What we see these days in the shameful aggression from Russia against Ukraine is the killing of all expression of culture and free culture. What we see in Xinjiang, the oppression against the Uyghur people, for instance, does not allow a free expression of culture. What we see in so many internal conflicts in Yemen, in Ethiopia, in South and in West Africa. This is the first step, peace, to achieve peace, to allow culture to express itself. This is basic for everything. When Herodot says, Pater Polemon Panton, the war is the father of all things, I think he's wrong. I think he's wrong. He's definitely not the father of culture, because culture needs human dignity, and human dignity is not a fruit of war. This is killing human dignity. So, and there we might have a difference to agricultural or technological protocols. So just to say, we have to distinguish when we speak about fair culture. Here, we want to discuss about the fair working condition in the cultural sector. This is different if you speak in countries like in Germany, where an actor normally has a contract by the state, or by the city, or by even a private company which engages him, and he has a possibility, even in times of COVID, to live. Or you have a street artist in Mozambique who falls into a deep nothing because nobody will pay him. So there we have to speak of different working conditions. By the way, a gallerist in the what you call the rich global north, who oppresses his artist to paint like this and to have bigger formats to sell it better, he's oppressing the liberal expression, the free expression of art, of culture as well. This was just my introduction remark, and I hope now we have concrete questions to continue to discuss.
Excellent, because it paints a broad picture of what we are dealing with. When we're talking about fair working conditions, by no means there's one working condition that fits all. They're distinct. They have many different conditions, co-conditions, as you brought forth in your argument, and we would like to hear from you concerning these very, very broad ideas about fair working conditions. What do you have in mind? What are your ideas? And since you already mentioned Jorge, please, maybe you can give us the concomitant local perspective of what Mr. Royce brought forward.
Sí, muchas gracias. Desde un punto de vista local, yo creo que la pandemia aceleró un proceso de digitalización en el mundo que se preveía para durar 4 o 5 años, y creo que el 90 o 95% de ese proceso se dio solamente en 2 años, que fueron los años de la pandemia, que se incrementó el consumo del audiovisual, se formuló un nuevo modo de consumo, las plataformas vivieron una edad dorada, y a esto correspondió localmente un incremento en la explotación de la mano de obra. Es decir, antes teníamos sindicatos que se ocupaban del cine y de la televisión, que han desaparecido a lo largo de los años, por lo menos los que son los del cine, y actualmente lo único que tenemos es una Asociación Nacional de Actores, que es quien rige los llamados, no sé cómo se dice en inglés, pero the calls, ¿sí? Que tienen ciertas restricciones por la Ley Federal del Trabajo y que cada vez se incumplen más. Es decir, hay jornadas de 15 o 16 horas, se incrementa el número de accidentes en el trabajo por pocas condiciones de descanso, y yo diría que a escala global la digitalización tiene 2 caras, como es frecuentemente en la vida, es decir, el lado bueno y el lado malo, lo positivo y lo negativo. Y en ese sentido, yo creo que la existencia de las plataformas digitales tipo Netflix, tipo HBO, etcétera, etcétera, tienen un lado positivo. Yo he podido ver series alemanas a las que no tenía acceso por la televisión aire, ahora a través de lo que es las plataformas de suscripción, o series escandinavas, o series italianas, y al mismo tiempo creo que en el caso de México se va a estandarizar, porque México es un país también desarrollado y subdesarrollado. Puede uno encontrar el norte con cierto grado de desarrollo y el sur con menor grado de desarrollo, pero se va a uniformar la producción. Realmente las plataformas necesitan hacer un producto digerible. Eso está en su esencia y creo que eso va a ocurrir en el cine mexicano.
Definitivamente, buen punto, pero vamos a tratar de relacionarlo más con lo que implica para las condiciones de trabajo. Let's relate that more to the idea of working conditions. As I can see, you were able to join us now. Welcome, Kenza. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm glad to be with you and to listen to those important ideas. Do you hear me?
Perfectly well, and that is wonderful. Let me just briefly say hello to Mara Chiara. Hello, are you there? And I can see that we do have a third person there, and I don't have the information. Please be so kind and let me know who else is connected.
This is Joy Mboya from Nairobi, from Kenya. Joy,
What a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome to this sessions where we are working on the fair working conditions within that notion of fair culture. We already heard what Peter and Jorge brought forward as ideas. What would you like to add? Maybe we start with Mara Chiara.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Maria Chiara Esposito. I represent the European Commission, the GEAC, and in particular the Cultural Policy Unit. I hope you can hear me well.
Difficulties with the sound. Maybe we can pull that a little bit up to get it clearer.
My sound is at the maximum. I don't know if you can from your side. I cannot hear you now.
Necesitamos el micrófono aquí abierto porque si no, no puedo comunicar con ellos. Thank you very much. Would you like to try again to see whether the sound conditions has...
Is it better now?
Yes.
Okay.
Much clearer. So sorry for that. You were saying we had to interrupt you because of these unfortunate technological questions. Please, we're attentively listening to what you have to share with us.
Yes, thank you. I was saying that I represent the Cultural Policy Unit in the European Commission, and I'm happy to share some very recent developments that are very pertinent to the topic of today and also to the general topic of the conference. Indeed, in the framework of our work plan for culture 2019-2022, which is coming to an end, we brought forward a very important activity and a tool for exchange, which is called OMC Group under the open method of coordination. It's a group of experts from the different member states of the European Union plus some third countries that gather together on the topic of working condition of artists and cultural professionals. And this is very linked to the priority of the Commission under the Work Plan for Culture on ensuring all actions and possible exchanges to improve diversity of cultural expressions and exchange of good practices among the member states that are sharing their difficulties and their policies to try to identify the most important recommendations that will be shared at European level. So the idea is that this group will issue a report at the beginning of next year after having analyzed across European countries the differences and also the common aspects of the challenge in the framework of the wider European priorities for cultural diversity and protection of cultural professionals and fair culture in general, because this was really strong priority of the work plan. And this is also very connected to another deliverable, which is part as well of these activities that we support as European Commission of expert groups of the member states. We have just released last week a report on the cultural dimension of sustainable development. And this is very linked to the topic of fair culture in two ways. First, because it shows how the role of culture, the power of culture is underused in all SDGs dimensions, even if it's increasingly recognized as part of a number of specific SDGs. But in the overall Agenda 2030, there is a misrecognition and especially a lack of use of the potential of cultural professionals, culture, artists, and cultural policy as a whole to drive and to foster sustainable development through transformational pathways. And one of the key transformational pathways that this report describes in its findings and in its analysis of the different member states is indeed that even the role of artists and cultural professionals and their fairness, a stronger equity and inclusion of their role goes through the capacity of policymakers to reinforce the integration of culture across policy areas of different nature to complement and to foster sustainable development strategies at strategic level. So these two aspects are very connected. Yeah. And this report is really timely.
Let me, Maria Chiara, I'm sorry for interrupting you here, but maybe we can, you know, just to bundle it better, like make some kind of shorter idea. So what you're saying basically is that the whole issue of culture is linked to the issue of work. So we have two things that have to be ingrained, and on a more European level, that is one of the perspectives to reach better and more far-reaching, fairer working conditions. Is that right?
Yes, from the broader perspective, you go into the different areas of actions, including the one of fairness.
Okay, exactly. That is one of the main points I think we have to take down. Joy, if you take the idea further, if you take it into your perspective, what would you add is also a pillar, something necessary within reaching fairer working conditions in the realm of culture?
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Perfectly well.
Great. So I think that I will go back to some points that were made in the earlier sessions by two individuals, one who was on the chat, and this was Ciso from Eswatini, and of course Maria from Mozambique, who was on the stage there. And I think what was interesting around what they were talking about were some fundamental realities depending on context, depending on where we are. So I think Ciso was asking the question, he said, where do we start from? What is the starting point for an African situation, for example, around this idea of fair culture? And I think that this is important in looking at this idea, because I think one of the speakers just now said that we are exploring this. We don't have the answers yet. And so as we explore it, I think that I'd like to go back to that question and say, so where do we come from? And I find that actors from the global south, whether we're talking about Africa, whether we're talking about Kenya, whether we're talking about Mozambique, we start from where we are. And where we are is an interesting space where the very fundamental recognition of culture, of the cultural worker, of the artist, can be a problem. And so you have to start there. I'll just give a very quick example. Today, a new cabinet has been named in Kenya. We have been waiting for the naming of this cabinet because we're always keen to see where has culture been located. And of course, these were flying around the social media. They were highly summarized, and we could not see culture. We could see a minister for youth. We could see a minister for ICT. We could see a minister for sports. But when we looked at the long form, we saw that the minister is the Minister for Youth Affairs, Sports, and the Arts. Now you can see that in the edit, we disappear. And I think that that is actually emblematic of the disappearance of cultural actors or culture itself within the space. So even before we talk about fair culture, I think the idea of recognition is one that needs to emerge. And one practical way that I'm noting actors in my territory are doing this is to break down the notion of culture into components that then speak to the reality of the context, which is that we are countries' information. African states are information. African cities are information. The independent African continent is also very young. It hasn't even hit a centennial yet. It is information. And cultural actors are operating in this process of making of nation. And so their work necessarily intersects, overlaps, integrates with the everyday of nation making. So the notion of how culture then can intersect with the idea of sustainable development, I think is a very powerful one. The Goethe Arts Center sits in a group, a creative economy working group, that actually looks at culture through this very lens. We say, what is the nation concerned about? They're concerned about jobs for young people. So we say, well, okay, how can we talk about the creative economy? They're concerned about data. And then we say, how can we talk about statistics? They're concerned about sustainable cities. And then we say, how does cultural infrastructure contribute to sustainable cities? So I think one strong recommendation from me would be, let us locate culture within the idea of sustainable development to really raise the possibility of it being recognized. And that recognition can then raise us to this conversation around fair culture, certainly in the global South. It doesn't mean that the issues of, it doesn't mean that the issues of mobility and visa and fair trade and all of that are negated, not at all. Those, of course, remain questions,
Exactly, we're talking a systemic phenomenon, as you put forward, where culture is not an isolated thing and has to gain value, has to be understood as something that can create value for a country, that can create wealth and so forth. So it's a systemic thing, and we cannot separate it from working conditions, from the bottom. Or top-down perspectives. We still have a few more minutes with the online situation, and I would like to go to Kenza. Kenza, we have now a broader perspective on what it does entail to talk about fair culture. What are two more major points you would like to add to what Joy and Maria Chiara had said before?
Hi everyone, I'm glad to see you again. And well, I will emphasize on the coherence of the values in order to rebuild a healthier ecosystem for culture. And let me share in the chat a few references, because my thought is based on the work my colleagues at the International Alliance of Independent Publishers carried through years. And we just published a guide for good practices in the field of independent publishing, which bring together years of reflection and experience, and which put our values into practice in a very concrete way. So I would like to quote 6 axes for building this ecosystem. First, the decolonial ecology, gender, freedom, social commitment, and solidarity. These are the main headlines of our commitments. Decolonial, because cultures should exist, as Joy said, wherever they exist and in their conditions. So this involves fighting against market domination by large groups, strengthening local ecosystem through local professional associations, through national policies for book or reading. The second axis about ecology is absolutely huge for now, and we need to establish short and circular circuits to avoid waste, to recycle, and overall no overproduction. Let's publish as organic farmers. The third axis is commitment to gender. To be fair, we have to be inclusive, to break with all relations of domination and discriminations against women, against LGBTQI+ minorities, but also against young people, and it begins by unequal pay. Fourth axis is freedom. We need to protect freedom of speech. It's absolutely necessary against all attempts at censorship, either from state, from religion, or from economics. And also, we need to fight against hate speech. We need to fight against policies that hinder the development of a critical citizen. Our fifth axis is social commitments. It starts with a good governance within our organizations and within the relation our organization have with their partners. It means fair remuneration. It means transparency. It means, above all, the fight against the Uberization of society. When you work with freelance partners, you have to keep them as part of your permanent team, even if you don't have them as salaries. And last but not least of the axis is solidarity. Solidarity with the whole book ecosystem. Independent publishers are the actors of societal change. They are committed to inventing initiatives that allow better inclusive access to the written word and to publishing through the development, of course, of alternative channels of dissemination and of distribution. So this is what we thought from our field of publishing and books, but I think this recommendation deserves to be considered for the other cultural fields. Thank you for your attention.
No, wonderful, wonderful. Everything you said, there's so much content in it. I know we're above our time limits for today. Thank you so much, first of all, for sharing all that. I hear that the breakout rooms are closing now, and we are all back into the main session. We're quite hurrying things. It's always, there's never enough time, as we say. But from what we heard here on our panel and from you joining us online, I think we have a bundle of ideas we can then share in the joint session where we will talk with the other classrooms on what they have reached. Are there any questions?
This meeting is being recorded.
I would like to hear from you. Is there anything you would like to ask concerning what we had discussed before? Do we have somebody who to collect the Oh, what is the role of cooperatives? Who would like to answer that? Cultural cooperatives, and how can they help to ensure fair working conditions? Este está funcionando.
Hola. Simplemente hacer una referencia concreta. En México las cooperativas de cine fueron muy importantes en los años 80 y relativamente importantes a principios de los años 90. Yo creo que rompió una ilusión que teníamos de haber creado una industria que venía del cine de oro mexicano, que es el cine de los años 40, 50 y 60. Es un ejemplo concreto, ojalá y sea de utilidad.
¿Algún otro ejemplo? Another example of cooperatives being helpful in creating different working environments within the realm of culture? Joy, what would be your perspective on that? I think we have, yeah, there's a communication issue. We have another question here in the auditorium.
Tomorrow, the European Commission is organizing a site event regarding the partnerships is seeking for the board that is managed by my will be presented by one of the chairs of this and the other chair of the committee will be
Salon Avila Camacho. We take notice of that, so that there's side events happening, discussing further certain aspects, and as you said, we have one Maria Chiara explained to us that the partnership will be there. 3 to 4, Salon Avila, 2 to 4, 2 to 3. Fantastic. Anybody else who would like to comment? Yes, please.
So to explain a little bit, myself, I am a plastic artist and also a musician. So I can see from the bottom what is happening towards the situation of youth artists that are starting their career. So I wanted to ask, how do you see the implementation of this movement of fair working conditions for artists and culture workers in general that can be made so that youth are included on this movement and not excluded as it is until today? So that is basically my question.
I think it's very difficult to answer this question because the working conditions of artists are completely different wherever they work, how they work, whether they work in cooperation with other artists or on their own. So there's no single answer, I think. Coming from Germany, I could tell you there is a Sozialkasse für Künstler. Please translate. The social security for artists. Which you don't have in many other countries. So there is a social trampoline where you can rely on, but many people don't have it. So on other, as I said beforehand, actors were often like civil servants, more or less, in Germany, and you don't have it in other groups. I can tell you one of the example we are actually dealing with in Paris. We are creating an artistic residence of the Balthasar Neumann Ensemble, which consists from orchestra, choir, and academy close to Paris in the castle of Fontainebleau. They are paying independently on their own with the money they gain or the money the president of the Balthasar Neumann is distributing. They're financing the artists from all over the world, from Cuba, Venezuela, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, all over the world. So it's very often the initiative of some artists or ensembles themselves.
We are now joined. No, you're so fine. I'm so glad to have you here. What we want to close the initial discussion for today. As we said, we didn't have anything ready. Our intention was not to define the concept. Our intention for today was to exchange ideas, to elaborate on some of the recommendations that then from now on can take the issue further and hopefully integrate fair culture into the public policy situation. We are closing now all of the rooms and we're back here in the main session just to see what is it that we came up with? What is it that we're going to take to the MONDIACULT 2022? And just one of the moderators is missing. I understand that Kimo is joining us online. Kimo Olaik is joining online. Are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Fantastic. Please, Kimo, we have to be brief. I know that this is difficult, such a complex issue, but please, could you mention 3 of the most important recommendations you could come up with in your classroom?
Yeah, I'll try.
Thank you. We're listening. Are you there?
Just a second, starting my video.
Oh, okay, fine.
Which does not seem to be cooperating. But anyway, should I start immediately? I should.
Yeah, that would be wonderful to hear recommendations. Just be brief if possible, and make it like a bullet point situation thing where we can hear 3 of the most important. I know it's difficult because there's many more, but maybe make it short in that way.
Yes, thank you very much. Excellencies, dear colleagues. If I were to summarize the most what we discussed in this half-an-hour breakout session, is that preferential treatment, and in particular Article 16 of the UNESCO 2005 Convention, is indispensable for furthering fair culture. I would say that it is a necessary, but alone not a sufficient condition that we need to when moving forward. There are already examples of some legal frameworks, such as the one concluded between CARIFORUM and the European Union. It's a free trade or partnership agreement, which is mostly a free trade agreement, but there is also a separate part, a protocol for cultural cooperation. And that kind of a legal framework would seem to be a very logical way of furthering, in particular, preferential treatment. However, in his little kind of introduction, Dr. Keith Nurse, who has studied the implementation of the CARIFORUM EU Partnership Agreement and the protocol, noted that there are several shortcomings, mostly pertaining to capacity building on the side of CARIFORUM member states, and some easily understandable concrete suggestions of how to increase the capacity of those countries to come up with the stronger governance for their cultural sectors, as well as strengthening their businesses that would be able to trade on more favorable terms. We had messages from our audience emphasizing that I would say that there were calls for operationalizing the preferential treatment principle provision also on regional, local level. So going to the grassroots in order to have meaningful pathway for further development. And finally, there was unanimity in this very little time that we had that such a already well-studied phenomenon as fair trade, fair culture, it's a complicated policy process, and any such policy process needs advocates as well as a platform whereby there was clearly support for a strong role for UNESCO as the UN agency closest to this issue, but not the only one, and wide outreach towards the sectors themselves, and then of course ensuring that the voices and visions and views of the global South will be sufficiently heard, because without that, fair trade in culture and fair culture will be very difficult to achieve, and that would also limit our capacity to promote the diversity of cultural expressions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kimmo, for that summarization of what happened in your room. I would now like to ask Peter Reuss if you would be so kind as to mention the main points we came up with in our main session here at the auditorium.
Thank you very much. We discussed about fair working conditions in the cultural sector, and we found out 4 points which I want to summarize. First of all, culture needs political recognition. This is within our nation states, within our national societies, as important as on the international scene. Therefore, we want to implement, and this is one of the goals of this conference, which starts tomorrow, to have culture as a international public good, to transform international law step by step in this direction. Why? Because we have to see creativity is a resource. Creativity is not something which is just the topping of something. It's not the cherry on the cake which you can have in good days, and you don't need if you have real problems like climate change or war and peace or other problems. Culture is not a luxury product which we can afford if we want to have it. Culture is a basic need for our societies to find new answers on the questions we are confronted with. Second point, security and peace. It's a rumor then that culture can live in times of war. We need, in these times, we spoke about Ukraine, we spoke about the oppression in China, and so on. We need personal dignity as a precondition of a free development of culture, because culture can only develop in a free society with freedom of spirit, freedom of expression. This is the requisite for a working and flourishing culture. Third point, social security for workers in the cultural field has decreased as the trade unions in the cultural sector have been decreasing. We have spoken about the good old days of trade unions in the cinema sector in Latin America and other where which their position is much weaker nowadays. And maybe this works together with we spoke about the banalization of culture, where there's only one culture, maybe in the film industry from Hollywood, but in the classical arts there's a couple of artists who direct the international art market. And fourth and last point, and I make brief to not to take too much of your attention. Digital transformation. Digital transformation was a big chance in times of COVID. A lot of chances were there, opened and helped us to survive this critical situation. But it's not automatically that social security is helped by digital transformation. This is unknown, a huge field which is fast developing, and the social security mechanism very often are coming far behind. So it's not the way that it goes hand in hand, the social security and the digital transformation. And we have to pay attention that we are not losing this most quick developing instrument for culture. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Peter. Marie-Julie, would you please share what you were talking about in your session and briefly tell us about 1, 2, 3 recommendations we can make for tomorrow.
I'll be brief because it was really brief altogether. So thank you for this opportunity. So we were on the 3rd session about diversity of cultural expressions and cultural value chains in times of digitization. So in relation, of course, with the concept of fair culture. So first of all, that's a discussion that's starting. We didn't, unfortunately, find a solution. There's no one solution to this extremely huge problem, of course. So first of all, we've heard about some initiatives in countries from the north, mostly France and Canada, where there are some initiatives, for example, legal framework in Canada. There will probably be something like a premium that will be working soon. In France, we've heard about SEO initiatives, etc. But there was a consensus about the fact that all the initiatives we heard about were from the north. So we have to continue the discussion about the countries from the south also. And also there was a discussion about is it possible to have the platforms to work with the cultural sector without a legal framework? Can we establish new partnership? And we have no real consensus on that topic. I think what comes from the discussion is that we have to try everything we can, but it's not time to give up on the legal framework, be it on an international level or a national level. There was a strong sense that the cultural sector did not try everything yet, and that the discussion with the platforms might only be beginning. Of course, they're not interested at the first glance on diversity of cultural expressions, but we have tools and we should continue to try to use them.
Excellent, thank you so much. And last but not least, Kiwar, por favor, compártenos lo que trabajaron en su sesión y quizás brevemente las 3 recomendaciones más importantes a las que pudieron llegar en este momento, en el entendido que no es conclusivo, sino es un punto de inicio.
Listo. Bueno, hola con todos los participantes, embajadores, autoridades. Bueno, en nuestra sesión tuvimos varias recomendaciones de parte de todos los participantes, pero puedo reconocer tres temas más importantes. Una, seguir manteniendo las redes actuales que tiene la conferencia MONDIACULT, las redes entre los organismos internacionales, aquellos que son parte del sistema de Naciones Unidas, y además también asegurar la presencia de redes que sean de alrededor del mundo, que es organizaciones, colectivos, etcétera, que sean parte de Fair Culture o que estén envueltos en proyectos relacionados a las industrias culturales y creativas. Segundo, ¿cómo asegurar la presencia de empresas u organismos de inversión para que las ideas o las recomendaciones o los proyectos que surjan de estas conferencias tengan un soporte económico también para la implementación de ellos? Entonces sería importante tener la presencia de empresas internacionales que busquen involucrarse en estos procesos de cooperación hacia proyectos de Fair Culture, y además cómo implementar las prácticas de Fair Culture dentro de estas empresas en cualquier actividad que sea la que ellos lleven a cabo. Siguiente, cómo asegurar la representatividad de artistas. Estamos hablando de industrias culturales y creativas y, como sabemos, hay una diversidad de sectores que son parte de estas industrias. Sería importante tener la presencia de los artistas o de los creadores o de los productores de estos bienes y servicios culturales para, bueno, conocer obviamente su experiencia y que haya una relación directa con los beneficios, con los resultados que buscamos a través de MONDIACULT. Y bueno, finalmente, ¿cómo podemos monitorear estas prácticas o estos proyectos? ¿Cuáles son los resultados que tenemos? Creo que existe tal vez una deficiencia en cómo monitorear el proceso de organizaciones, de empresas o cualquier entidad que está llevando a cabo proyectos relacionados a fake culture. Entonces sería importante tener estos mecanismos o utilizar los que ya existen para el monitoreo de los resultados y el desarrollo de estos procesos. Gracias.
Excelente, muchas gracias, Kivar. Hemos hecho hoy un esfuerzo complejo, tecnológicamente también demandante, so it was all an effort to have this hybrid event. We do apologize if there were some technical delays or some difficulties concerning our breakout rooms. That is, of course, always expected if you're trying to unite the world, because we have to admit that we had audience experts joining us from all 5 continents and different time zones. So these little hiccups, as they call them, do happen. What is wonderful that we are starting a dialogue, that we're starting to become aware of what fair culture could be and should be in the near future. And I'm especially thrilled from a personal point of view to see so many young people, so many young engaged people all over the world. We have seen them on screen, we heard from them, we heard their ideas from a local perspective, a more global one, or even the global one. So that is very promising. So there's something starting. Maybe it is a kind of a movement, as you pointed out. Maybe there is a chance. We have the foot in the door, but we have to keep on talking. We have to keep up the dialogue, and we have to cross-reference our experiences and of our different perspectives on culture. As we heard, there's so much diversity, so many things to solve in the ecosystem of culture, in the systemic world of it all, that this is just a starting point. So thank you so much for that moment. We would like to conclude our today's first event of fair culture, not the last, it's the first in a long chain of things, with some thoughts and recommendations and reflecting, finalizing remarks of Her Excellency, the Minister of Culture of the Republic of Colombia. If you please would like to join me on. ¿Funciona esto? Ya. Yo muy bien, encantada de conocerla. Gracias. Bienvenida, por favor. La acompaño. ¿Gusta que se quede en el,
sí, está bien,
en el soporte?
Sí.
Adelante.
Gracias, muchas gracias. Un saludo a este encuentro tan importante, a la UNESCO, a todas las personas que han intervenido. Muchas gracias. Creo que es muy importante plantearse el tema de la justicia en la cultura y desde la cultura. Y seguramente hay muchas cosas que se pueden hacer. También plantearse la preocupación del sustento de los artistas y de las artistas. Me parece un asunto fundamental. Sin embargo, hay que dejar más que unas respuestas con una certeza absoluta, unas preguntas muy importantes. Es muy difícil pensar en una cultura justa cuando el modelo que hemos tenido es tan injusto. Es decir, es un modelo dominante, muy difícil, que ha llevado, es más que injusto, porque ha llevado a la humanidad al peligro de su propia extinción. Y ese modelo tiene que ver con un modelo económico también, de una sociedad de mercado que no era como decían que iba a ser. Y de ese modelo participaron los países más ricos, un modelo que planteaba que la sociedad de mercado lo iba a solucionar todo. Y ese modelo también incluyó la cultura, incluyó las políticas culturales. Entonces, incluyó también el lenguaje en esas políticas culturales. O sea, yo soy artista, yo vengo del mundo del arte, he hecho parte de un grupo de teatro alternativo, emblemático, que se llama el Teatro La Candelaria, y he vivido como artista lo que es, digamos, la dificultad tan grande de tener la necesidad vital de ser creadora, y al mismo tiempo la dificultad de relacionarse con el Estado. Ahora yo estoy en el Estado. Hay un gobierno reciente del presidente Gustavo Petro que tiene un discurso distinto también frente al modelo, frente a un modelo que ha vivido de la extracción de los recursos, de los llamados recursos fósiles, y que le ha sacado las entrañas a la tierra. Entonces, yo creo que necesitamos otro discurso, necesitamos repensar la cultura de otro modo. No es la cultura la que sea justa o injusta. Detrás hay personas, hay sujetos que la convierten en justa o en injusta. Para nosotros, y en este caso hablo como artista, ha sido difícil que de pronto dejemos de ser artistas y nos hayan convertido en emprendedores, en agentes. Es un lenguaje que ha transformado lo más importante que tiene un artista o una artista, porque yo soy feminista, entonces por eso hablo de un y una, que es la creatividad. La creatividad de un artista es sagrada, así como los saberes de los pueblos indígenas y afrodescendientes. Eso es sagrado porque es otro relato. Europa y los Estados Unidos, los países ricos, no pueden seguir viviendo con un solo relato. Necesitamos la polifonía de los relatos, necesitamos todos los relatos. El arte es muy importante porque es un ejercicio de la libertad. Entonces, es fundamental, por supuesto, pensar en la necesidad de que los artistas puedan vivir de su trabajo, por lo menos de que puedan vivir. Pero más importante que eso es reconocer lo que hacen, reconocer la importancia que tiene para la sociedad el relato, un relato de nación, un relato, es decir, explicar eso en tan corto tiempo es difícil, pero trataré. El mundo necesita no de otro relato, sino necesita de todos los relatos frente a la sociedad, frente a las naciones. Somos un mundo diverso, un mundo complejo. De esa complejidad la necesitamos. Eso no niego la importancia de una cultura justa. Yo creo que una cosa que puede hacer la UNESCO, por ejemplo, es proponer a los gobiernos un porcentaje de sus presupuestos que vaya destinado a la cultura. Y ese porcentaje que vaya destinado a la cultura, de ese porcentaje también que haya un porcentaje importante para el arte y los artistas, porque la cultura no es solamente el arte, la cultura es el asunto político por excelencia, porque tiene que ver con los modos de ser, de pensar, de hacer y de decidir de las personas y de las sociedades. Y nosotros en Colombia, en este momento, en este gobierno, incluso le vamos a cambiar el nombre al Ministerio de la Cultura. Se va a llamar Ministerio de las Culturas, las Artes y los Saberes, porque queremos incluir también los saberes de nuestros pueblos indígenas, afrodescendientes y del campesinado colombiano. Ellos también hacen parte de la cultura. Eso quería decir. Y pienso también que tiene que pensarse en otro tipo de relaciones internacionales que no sean exclusivamente desde la diplomacia internacional, sino desde el intercambio cultural. Un intercambio cultural real que permita la cohesión del mundo desde otros lugares, precisamente desde los relatos de nación, que los necesitamos. Europa y Estados Unidos no pueden seguir con un solo relato, que es el relato propio. Entonces yo pienso en Colombia, dentro de este gobierno del presidente Gustavo Petro, estamos trabajando por la cohesión cultural de América Latina y el Caribe. Nos parece muy importante porque necesitamos vitalmente de todos los relatos, tanto de los relatos nuestros que nos habitan como de los de América Latina y del mundo. No me quiero extender más, agradecer esta reunión, pero pienso que desde una noción justa de la cultura justa se pueden hacer muchas cosas. Y agradezco como artista y como ministra que se piense en la sobrevivencia de los artistas. Muchos artistas han vivido sin dinero, pero lo que han hecho es transformador. O sea, hay que entender la cultura como transformadora, no como mercancía. La cultura está hecha para transformar la realidad, no está hecha como una cultura espectáculo o como una cultura del exotismo, desde donde se hacen muchas veces el intercambio cultural. Entonces yo vengo aquí sobre todo también para hablar de una cultura de paz. El mundo necesita de una cultura de paz y la UNESCO puede ayudar enormemente en eso. En Colombia también necesitamos una cultura de paz y estamos construyéndola, no solo para nosotros, sino para el mundo. Queremos ser una potencia de la vida. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Su Excelencia. Thank you so much for today's work, for being with us. Thank you so much to the Institute, the Goethe-Institut in Mexico City. Muchas gracias por su trabajo, por su ayuda. Thank you very much to everybody who worked so hard in helping us translating the many important messages we heard today. Thank you for that. And I hope we see each other soon again. As we said, this is a starting point to keep up the discussion on fair culture. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes, buenas noches, en donde estén. Que tengan un buen día. Hasta luego.
Those of you who are in the room, please join us for some coffee and some snacks outside. There is still plenty of snacks and drinks outside. Thank you very much.
Ich wollte erst warten, dass das Recording gestoppt hat.